So welcome back to the next episode of the Rogue Trader podcast. Today I'm joined by Mark Varacchi. Mark and I don't know each other, so we've not met on the speaking circuit or anything like that, so it's going to be quite an interesting discussion. I'm really looking forward to it, more so because of what Mark does now, as opposed to his background. So like me, Mark has a checkered career in the financial services industry. I think that's probably a polite way of saying it for us both. But maybe, Mark, what you could do is you could give us a very potted history of your time in the financial markets. I know you worked for Tiger for a while when you worked in New York, a company I know quite well, very much at the cutting edge, if you like, of the financial markets, a firm that was always a firm that people wanted to work for. It was it was a career highlight, I suppose, if you worked for Tiger during the 90s. So if you could just give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and how things are, or how things evolved for you over that period.
Sure. Yeah, it was all downhill from there, basically.
It's a bit like me in Singapore, I think, is probably, people say, when did it all go wrong? And, for me, it was Singapore. For you, it was Tiger. Like if you could do something again, I use a phrase, and maybe this does apply to you, maybe it doesn't, but I use a phrase which is everybody reaches their own level of incompetence. That's what I did in Singapore.
I got it. Mine came a little later, but Tiger is where I kind of started and what I would say kind of made my bones in the industry.
Yeah.
They dealt with every type of product, as you know, from futures to commodities to long short equity. I mean, anything under the sun, Tiger kind of dealt with, which was a great opportunity to go learn. I think, like yourself, I started in operations or back office, and then moved my way forward from there. So you and I have some common threads, which I always kind of found interesting when I was kind of doing a lot of reading about you. That doesn't, it comes out, but I was like, wow, okay, and it was something that we both used when we were doing things wrong, somewhat to our advantage, because we knew how the sausage was made. And it allowed me to do certain things, knowing what people were looking at and what they weren't, because I knew every aspect of what happened after a trade was done, which to me kind of helped me later on when I was doing things that were not correct. It was, I moved through, I worked at large hedge funds, multi-billion-dollar funds. I sat on the desk for a couple of years working for another fund, but I was at Galleon, which had their own kind of insider trading scandal and issue. I was not there for that. I had left before kind of that all came to a head, and worked at a couple of multi-billion-dollar funds here in Connecticut. As a senior operations person before I kind of started to develop and do things to be able to start my own fund. Eventually I started it. That is where that intervention of ourselves happened. And I was indicted in 2017 on securities and wire fraud charges. Of which I pled guilty, and I did a little time up in Otisville, New York.
Okay. And like some people, was it a Ponzi scheme or was it something completely different?
As my dad said after I told him, at least it was an Italian crime. Yes, it was a Ponzi scheme, by definition, which, I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know what it is. But at the end of the day, essentially the bare bones is using funds from new investors in order to pay old investors on the way out, where usually the rubber meets the road, either when the markets are down or when there are more redemptions, obviously, than incoming money to pay people, and people start to get concerned. A la Madoff.
Yeah, usually, and you still see so much of it in today's world. Whether it's financial markets or something else, an investment in a hotel or some sort of complex that somebody's promoting at the time. It is something that unfortunately happens. There are a couple of things I just wanted to touch on from that introduction. Obviously, you said that you come from an operations background, and I started in settlements in Morgan Stanley. I was previously at Coutts, which is more of a boutique retail bank, if you like, high street bank, and then moved on to Barings, where again that's where everything started to go wrong for me. But I think one of the things that I was accused of at one particular speech that I was doing, and I'm sure you come across some really funny episodes when you're talking at events and at conferences and at companies as well. But one person stood up and he said, what you did was organizational arbitrage. And I had to think about it for a little bit, and I can see how from the outside it does look like that, and you've kind of alluded to that a little bit yourself. But in my case, it was there wasn't that many systems or controls that needed to be overcome. It was just a case of surviving day by day and somehow pushing myself deeper and deeper into that situation. But in your case, genuinely, the knowledge of the systems and the processes was an advantage to you in concealing what you were doing during that particular period.
Well, I've heard you do some great talks out there on the circuit, and I've listened to a couple. And another thing that resonated with me is that the people that are overseeing this, outside of my knowing the systems, I have to say the people set the bar very, very, very low. So at the end of the day, if you both know the systems and you both know that the people whose job is in prevention and they're really asleep at the wheel or don't go more than one layer in the onion, that combination makes it much easier. I would say that of everything that was implemented and everything that was done, almost all of them could have been caught by the right human being doing their job correctly. But, I will say in this industry, and when it comes to fraudsters now, whether you're talking about whether it's through cyber currency and all the different, pig butchering, and when you have romance scams, they are all students of the game. They wake up earlier than anybody else, and they go to sleep. If the person that's trying to prevent crime is spending a 5-hour day outside of lunch, coffee breaks, and going home early, the bad guys are always going to be light years ahead of them, because the bad guys are using game theory and truly planning out their attack every day and trying to set up for every instance of rebuttal. And usually, like I said, 3 or 4 steps ahead of the good guys, where, look, you can wait till someone makes a mistake. And when you look at Ponzi schemes, usually it's not them getting caught. It's there being a situation where if the markets were still good and money was still coming in, no one would have ever caught them.
Yeah, look, it would be great to get you back onto another podcast with one of the other people that comes on from time to time with me, Una, who's, she's very big in the risk compliance area and the whole scam area about the pig butchering and the romance scams. And I've got some horrific stories that I can tell you about some of the cases that we look at there. But one of the biggest things for me, and I think I heard this in some of the interviews that you've given as well, you lose your reputation, and how you then recover from that is very important. And like me, I sense that you use humor quite a bit. I think it's a good way to deflect from some of the things that you're feeling. I think in the immediate furore after everything is happening, and I know yours was a little bit slower than mine, and I'd like to explore that a little bit in a minute. But you go through that guilt, the shame. I think for me, I'm still embarrassed by it all. I can't think of anything that I would have wanted to happen least, and I'll always be remembered for that period. And mine was quite a sensational case where obviously the bank collapsed and it was global news for a period of time. So the embarrassment always stays with me, but I think humor is a good coping strategy.
I resemble that comment very much. I think I think self-deprecation in some ways is things I use as a shield.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody. I don't really worry about anybody saying anything about me because nobody says anything worse about me than I do, to be honest.
yeah,
Um, and at the end of the day, I was waiting for sentencing for about 6 years.
yeah,
So that limbo after that reputational hit was something kind of that was a little tougher to kind of get through because you could never really start that next chapter because it wasn't done yet.
yeah.
And it was, go ahead.
Go on. I was going to say it must have been horrific, because
Yeah.
just
And
looking at that timeline, it was 2017, I think, when when you were first indicted, or whatever the correct word is in the US. You then got the whole COVID area where nobody knows what's going on, and you're waiting through that. And what year was it that you started a prison sentence?
2023.
Wow. So you're looking at 6 years where you're in that limbo. I describe it as, I like to look at everything in terms of black and white. And when you're in that limbo, it's what I describe as grey. You don't know what the hell is happening. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what's going to happen to you. And it's scary. And if you combine that with the outcome as you would have known it potentially at that time as a prison sentence, and you don't know how long it's going to be, or anything else, it's very, very challenging psychologically to deal with that.
It is. I mean, you're always kind of just waiting for, it feels like you're in a game that you're down, whether it's cricket, whether it's baseball, you're in the last inning, the last over, but it never gets to begin. And all you want to do is be able to start the next game and work towards the next chapter. And,
Yeah.
closing that chapter is important. And, I wanted to make a most of whatever that next chapter was, and I started it early, even when I was incarcerated.
Yeah.
And it when you think about it, and you think about it, even like when you speak to people who are in recovery, um, the attitude is like, I'm just not going to drink today. Well, I look at it as like, I'm going to do something good for somebody today, and I never know when or if, and probably never, that the scales will kind of weigh in a way where I feel like I'm on even keel
Mm.
with the bad things I've done. But I know if I do good things every day, that progress is what keeps me going. And I worry about today, and I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. But when I wake up, I got good things in mind, and there are a lot of people who need assistance that are in the same position I was, but I come from a much, much stronger expertise and power of knowledge that I think from the first phone call, I mitigate a lot of their fears. Because, like I said, fears are what they don't know. And if they watched a couple of episodes of Oz after they got in trouble and don't know what's coming, and they think the worst prison experience is what's in front of them. And I give them the ability to have some hope and understand what they're going to go through.
Yeah, I think on one of the things that I was listening to that you were talking about, it was that fear is the unknown, and I can totally endorse that. And prison, for somebody like you and I, coming from a very white collar background, as a lot of people do, prison is something that you just don't ever think about. And going back to something that you were saying there in terms of that limbo, for me, it was the worst part was when I was in prison in Germany. So I was facing extradition back to Singapore. I was facing 12 charges of 7 years. The English media, which is there, especially the red top English media, was speculating that I was going to get 84 years in prison. It's not something to look forward to. And you, like you said, you want to get to the start of the next part, if you like. And for me, that was negotiating with the Singaporeans and agreeing a sentence that I could start to get my head around. And unlike having somebody like you there I don't think mentor is the right word, but assist me through the process, you're doing that all of the time on your own. And, the person you rely on is your lawyer. And I think certainly from a UK perspective or a European perspective, because you're in the prison, it's the only communication you've got. And I always think back to my time in prison in Germany, and I was very lucky. I had a very good lawyer. He became like a friend, and I think he always gave me his best advice. But I don't think that's what lawyers do in general. They tell you what they think you want to hear, and that's of no use to anybody. I use a story of my time in remand in prison in Germany. I was actually there with an American guy called Alan Starkey, who was a friend to John Bryan, who was with one of the royal family for a period of time in the UK. I think he got pictured sucking her toes or something ridiculous. That was what he'll always be remembered for. That's his most embarrassing moment. But he had a guy in the cell next to him who was German, and he'd committed murder. And he'd stabbed this person multiple times. I think it was, like 30 or 40 times. But every time he went down to the visit room and he met his lawyer, he used to come back, and he used to be in the highest spirits because he was getting released the next day. And we're like, we're looking at him aghast and going, look, you murdered someone. You're not going anywhere. There's absolutely no chance but that was what his lawyer told him. And I just kind of got a little bit, incredulous isn't the right word, but I just got a little bit disappointed with the industry because I just think that's what lawyers do, full stop. They tell you what you want to hear.
I look at it as a lawyer has a specific core competency, right? And when someone comes to the table, you're dealing with either pleading guilty, possibly cooperating, fighting, or kind of burying your head in the sand. And they have to navigate, and their core competency is to deal with one of those things to fruition. I look at them as a great chef. They have to put together kind of the perfect meal based on what you decide. But once that meal gets in front of you, if you don't have utensils and you don't have a drink, it's a huge problem. There are things that the lawyers would never, ever think about that once you are inside and once their job is done, which is usually at sentencing if there's not an appeal, but once they're done, all the decisions that you've made in the public statements you've made, both at sentencing and potentially during what here in the U.S. is called a PSR or PSI, which is a pre-sentencing interview that happens by an independent probation officer that gets given to the judge. Those two reports have all the information that the judge gets to use, and when you're incarcerated, they get to use to understand who you are, right? And I don't think the attorneys are necessarily thinking about things to put in there that could help someone once they're incarcerated. Again, they're focusing on what they're great at, and honestly, you want your lawyer to do that. But after going through it, I try to spackle all the holes that I felt everybody was feeling that was incarcerated with me that wasn't getting addressed. And I realized that those aspects were as important as the outcome of their case, knowing that they were probably guilty. So I try to kind of fill in those gaps and give them the information so that they always have a record of the things they're looking for. And I get them things that maybe if it wasn't mentioned or if it wasn't said or if they weren't thinking along these lines, they wouldn't necessarily get if they were just going kind of plain vanilla down the road based on an attorney's knowledge, which again is unbelievably important. There's not as much overlap between what they do and I do. I don't try to be an attorney, but they definitely don't try to do the things that I do to try to make. I got to prepare for worst case scenario. I don't give you, you're getting out tomorrow. I give you, I'm going to prepare you and your family in every aspect that if you get the worst sentence, it will be the best outcome for you. Everything else that happens better than that is gravy and a cherry on top for you. But we're going to prepare for the worst outcome. I try to be really realistic with these guys.
Well, you're definitely a bit kinder on lawyers than I am, but this is a genuine story as well. we'd agreed the terms with the Singaporean police, I had to make a public apology. I had to pay a certain amount of money to the Singaporean police to help cover the costs. And so my maximum sentence then was 8 years, and I got sentenced to 6.5 in the end. But then we started it was the first time ever we'd engaged with a Singaporean lawyer. So we started to talk to him, and he thought I was only going to get 18 months in prison. So he was 5 years out when he was given his estimate. But the worst part was that he was trying to tell me what the prisons were like. So he said, "Oh, you'll definitely go to a medium security prison. They do certain events. They have karaoke at the weekends." And I was like, "Yeah, it doesn't sound too bad. Maybe I'm not as scared as I should be." I turned up. I was in a maximum security prison. There were Gurkhas patrolling the walls with guns ready to shoot you. You slept on the floor. The floor was very rough and uneven. Everybody else is a triad gang member. And you've got to very quickly learn how to behave. And that's where I think what you're doing, and I told you previously that I know Walt Pavlo as well, or I've spoken with Walt over the years as well. I think what you're doing in terms of preparing people for what comes next is such an important tool, because, in the UK, and we spoke about this previously before we started the podcast, you stand up in the dock and you get sent down. So, you walk out a back door and you're in a van and you're going to prison. And, you get the strip search and everything else that's going to go on, and you get given your clothes to wear, and then that's it. And you have to learn how to behave. How do you look at certain people? And, we've all watched some of the prison dramas that go about on TV, and we have a preconceived idea. The preconception on my part didn't ring true in Singapore, but I think it's a safer, more controlled environment from the minute you leave the airplane anyway, whether you're incarcerated or not. So that may not exactly correspond with what goes on in the US, but the thing that I've always found fascinating, and perhaps you can explore this one a little bit for us, is actually so you get sentenced, and then you might have a short period of time before you have to turn up at prison. I'd run away. I don't know what I'd do, but I wouldn't turn up at prison. What thought processes go through your head as that, like we've talked about time moving slowly, but that period must be, I don't know, is it a period you make the most of? Is it a period that you just, you're counting down the days and it's absolute dread? I can't comprehend it.
So I would say my situation is different. I'll give you a quick on my situation, but then talk to you where I think kind of everybody is. Everybody is generally obviously scared. The idea is I try to prepare them. For me, after 6.5 years of waiting, I was almost like, let me get this over with. Like I can't get in, I can't get out until I get in. So let me get in, let me get this started so I can start the next chapter of my life. But I do think in going in, if you're prepared, it makes a difference. But either way, it's an unknown. It doesn't matter what anybody tells you. You still go, you know what? If it's not, there's nothing I'm going to be able to do about it. And waiting for that date to kind of come down, and then showing up at 9:30 in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning.
You have an appointment, don't you? A time that you've got to arrive to sort of turn yourself up.
Here's the deal. They basically say show up on, and I'll tell you a funny story, because now we're just past April Fool's. But I was supposed to show up on April 1st of 2023, right? So the judge gives you a date, you show up, right? That was a Saturday. So I showed up early because I heard that if you show up later and they don't get you checked in, you have to go to solitary confinement until the people come in. So I was like, you know what? I'm showing up at the crack of dawn. I'll wait there for them. Let's get this going. I went in and they took my ID. They started to check me in, and they're like, why are you here on a Saturday? I said, well, because that's the date. They went, okay. They kept going, and they were like, by the way, we're going to have to put you in solitary confinement until Monday. Nobody's here for the weekend. And I went, April Fools. Like, haha, like I can't go home. I'll come see you on Monday. And they went, nope, you're here. Like technically we can't go backwards. So we can't unring this bell, and you're going to be in solitary until Monday. I would say starting in solitary, everything's downhill from there. For those 2 days, not even, understanding, that the water at the sink could actually, if you turn it 180 degrees, it would steam. So I'm drinking lukewarm, granulated coffee in the morning because I thought that the hot only went like my sink at home goes, right? You don't even understand the tools that you're dealing with when you're there. And it is, imposing, where while I was there, I was wondering, like, is there a chance these guys get it wrong? Because solitary is inside the medium. I wasn't going to the medium. I was going next door. But you're in the medium, and the solitary is for the medium. So I would say the overnight ruckus was probably not something that I was used to. There's no, when I'm here in Connecticut and I close my eyes, there's not like four people freestyle rapping until 4:30 in the morning. It just doesn't happen here. Although, my sons are fans, but it's just not what they do. So again, when you're there, I said, what if they take me out of here and say you're up in Gen Pop? Do they know who I am? And it wasn't until Sunday, when the priest came to give me communion, that I realized he knew my name and knew where I was going. But from Saturday morning at 9 a.m. until Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m., which I would say 36 hours kind of feels like about 2 weeks when you're in solitary and you just came from like McDonald's Saturday morning at 7 a.m. It was a different experience. And look, that was kind of the start where I said preparation is key. And then once I got inside, everybody was complaining about the so-called, if someone hired a consultant, they hated them after the first 2 weeks because they weren't really preparing them and didn't understand what was going on in the policies. And I said, you know what? There's something here. And I decided to kind of be a student of the game and slowly get a knowledge base in order to help others. But obviously I made sure I knew what I was doing. The last thing you want to do is give bad advice in prison. So, I took some time, hit the books, and then, went by mine and others' experiences, which I think has given me a good foundation. And I will tell you, Walt Pavlo is unbelievably great at what he does. I think there needs to be more help for people. I don't look at like competition like that. I think Craig Rothman in New York does an unbelievable job in helping clients. And I try to lift up the good guys in the industry. I do think some guys maybe they've lost some speed on their fastball and they've been around a long time, and it's more like a fear-mongering kind of aspect, and they don't kind of keep up on the policies. But the core guys that are out here in the industry are pretty amazing. And if I feel I can't help somebody in a way, or we don't mesh, the first thing I do is try to pass them over to a Walt or a Craig Rothman and get them the right help. It's not about making it hard. It's about making sure that people have that peace of mind in getting the right assistance.
Maybe they need to go back to prison to refresh their experiences so that they're more current. I don't know. Is there a scheme that gives you a couple of days back inside to make sure that you're
now you're going to make me patent a continuing education course now.
Yeah, I think things change, don't they? So you want the best advice and the most current advice. I think one of the things for me, I suppose, was, so we've touched on a few of them already, that fear of the unknown. I think anything that serves a purpose in reducing or controlling that is, something that everybody should engage in if they find themselves in this situation. The other thing was about knowing how to behave. Because you're going to come up against people that you might not normally have come up against in your day-to-day life. So for me in Singapore, it was, there were two different types of inmate whilst I was in prison in Singapore. There were those that had been that had been prosecuted and been handed down a sentence and were serving those sentences. And, you'd have people, the sentences tended to be quite long. The prison population was very young because obviously they have capital punishment, the death penalty for drug offences. But there was also a part of the jail, which I was in, where it's called criminal law detention, and you don't actually go to trial. So it's normally when there's been a gang clash or something in Singapore, somebody dies, but they can't work out who it is. So they might take 5 people from one gang and they might take 5 people from another gang, and they imprison them under criminal law detention, which is an old English law. It's called, I think it's called CLD 55. And they're there, and they every year they go back to court at night, and their sentence gets extended usually. So there's people in there who have still got their civil clothes on. They are some are there for up to 15 years. I think 15 years is the maximum you can stay there. So you're held without trial, and these guys are called the gangsters. So they're always regarded as being quite dangerous, but the definition is always by gang. So you've got Chinese gangs, you've got Indian and Malay gangs, and you've got other gangs that form up in there as well. So there wasn't a great deal of violence because, as I said at the beginning, being Singapore, there's an awful lot of control. It's very regimented, and people don't normally step out of line. You have you still have corporate punishment inside the prison, so they're still caning people on a weekly basis. So the one thing for me, and it was boring, we were locked up 23 hours a day. It was, you didn't really have many books. There wasn't anything that you could do to occupy your mind, but you really did know how to you needed to know how to behave, because you were mixing with some people who were quite dangerous, and there were rules amongst those gangs. So you and I just talking now, we could have a bit of a laugh, and I could maybe make fun of you, you could make fun of me. But if we were in a group environment, or there were 2 people on your side, you couldn't allow me to do that, because it was exceptionally disrespectful, and you would have to attack me. And there were certainly other English guys. There weren't a lot of English guys who made their way into the prison over that time, but there were 1 or 2, and they didn't quite get it. And they'd continue having a laugh with these people, whether they were 1-on-1 or 1-on-2, and it just went badly wrong for them. I think that, and this is a bit of a funny story for you, Mark, but I was kind of at general level in the triad gang hierarchy. I wasn't in any of the gangs. I was never forced to join them, and you usually are. But I was kind of at general level, which was the highest level, and that was because everybody believed that I stole $2 billion. So I wasn't bothered about correcting them because it kept me safe. They all thought I was this uber criminal that got away with this fantastic sum of money. So in their lives, in their world, I was the pinnacle of what they were trying to achieve, I suppose. I don't know, but it kept me safe. And that's I look back at it, and I've always said that I was very socially adept and could deal with most situations. And I'm not going to say I breezed through prison, because it's a tough environment in Singapore, and it's boring, and it's repetitive, and it's mundane, and the food's awful, and everything, all those sort of things I think you experience. But socially, I managed to get through it quite easily.
So what I'll say is, in the U.S., obviously, the higher insecurity risk you get, race obviously is a big is the biggest separator. But yes, the gangs within those races are also kind of those subsets, even though they will initially separate by race. So in certain situations, depending on the charges and depending on the years, right? Because you're not going to a minimum, you don't have an opportunity to go to a camp here in the U.S., which is the lowest level, unless you're under 10 years. Obviously, you can't have any violence. After that, there is a significant difference between a camp and a low, but also a low and a medium, obviously, and a medium and a max. So I have people on my team that I try to go to the experts. I always try to tell people I'm not trying to be a jack of all trades, master of none. And I know where I was incarcerated, and I know that's my core competency. But I bring on great guys that I know both can communicate and have been there to be able to help people who are going to be at different levels with their experience. And I bring them in order to, when it is time to talk about the inside aspect of the facility, what to do, what not to do, what are the rules there. Because I hope you'll agree, like some of the rules, like common sense has nothing to do with it. It's just, this is a rule here.
Yeah.
And it may not make sense, but you have to do it. And it may be how you dress or where you're allowed to walk dressed. How, if you've been an athlete all your life and been around locker rooms your whole life, guess what? You better learn what to do when you're in there, because you can't be as comfortable walking around in even boxer shorts, depending on where you are and when. Not due to danger, due to mutual respect, because you need to know what the rules are. And I will say, when the new guys come in and they break a rule, no matter what it is, even if it's how to deal with an ice machine or a food item, they get ostracized for weeks. It takes them a long time to catch up from being the idiot that basically did the wrong thing and broke the rule that everybody knows. Even some of the simplest innocuous rules that you would think about. I think that preparation is a lot, because you look, we all, as we say everywhere in life, like a first impression matters. Not making a mistake and being able to stay under that radar and not being not having headlights on you is a good thing to do when you first get in. I always tell people to just kind of look around. You can tell how people interact, who they are, what other people think about them. I also tell people, you don't necessarily want to bond with the first guy that comes. You always want to be respectful, but sometimes the first person that comes to you is the person that needs somebody the most, and they may not be desirable to everybody else there. So it's a weird psychological game, but I have people just kind of like, just get the lay of the land, but being respectful and thank you and all that, to me, is the very basics. But then you kind of got to read how everybody that's been there for a while is dealing with each other, and how people that maybe you deem get respect deal with others. So it's a tough situation, and it is like a snowflake, because on the white collar side, we're all A-type jerks, right? So you have a different type of attitude with guys who've never had to answer to anybody and was used to calling everybody any name they wanted to, right? And then you have different between generations, right? Generation X and me, and we always dealt with it like, if you had an issue with somebody, you go met them out on the street and somebody got a black eye, and after that, like, it all worked out. Here, it's all about behind the scenes, internet. They don't deal with things the same way, but in prison, it's they march to their own drummer, and you have to understand the kingdom you're in. No matter where you are, and be respectful. It won't make sense at times, but that doesn't matter.
No, it definitely doesn't make sense at times, and I think that respect side of it is the most important thing. But I think that's true in in everyday life. I never have preconceived opinions on people, and I know a lot of people do. For me, you've got to take people at face value, and that's the best way to deal with the situation. Just as you were talking, and I was just there were kind of a couple of sort of memories going back through my mind, and I suppose one of the things that I was thinking when I went into you don't take gifts from people, and and that's kind of, again, it's going back to one of those preconceived prison type scenarios that you might see on TV. And it didn't really ring true for me, because, as I said to you earlier, I was in with the real gangsters, the criminal law detention guys. So they'd all been involved in, murder or something else quite sinister. You still wouldn't have been able to tell which one had actually killed somebody, because there was, there's that omerta that they're not speaking, and that's why they're all there. But there was one guy who was, obviously some of the people become non-gang affiliated whilst they're in prison. And there was one guy that used to keep trying to deliver so I was on 23-hour lockup, and he was what they used to call a cookie. So he was doing the cleaning around Singapore, and they'd deliver your food up for the people who are locked up all day. Every now and again, he'd throw a chocolate bar in, and I'd be like, no, I'm not touching that. But he was just doing it out of the goodness of his heart. He was non-gang affiliated. The gangs would be sending food up to their own people who were in the 23-hour lockup. And he was kind of doing it for the people that were non-gang affiliated, which was me. Pretty much everybody else was gang affiliated. And you kind of, over time, I got to know him. And again, it's that respect, it's that getting to know people and taking them at face value. And not everybody has bad intent. But you've got to be able to work, again, you've got to circumnavigate that, and you've got to be able to work that out for yourself.
Yeah, it's about getting to know the guys. I mean, look, once I got myself up to speed a lot, I gave a lot of my time. And the one thing I do say, in I don't know if you agree with this, but you have a different version of how valuable and how time is precious once you go through something like that. And I'm a stickler for like on time. Like now I'm more of a pain in the neck because I look at time as something like a commodity. Forget gold, forget platinum and all this. Like time is precious, and when you lose time and you feel like the time has been wasted, you want to be pensive of others. When I gave people my time, it all started a relationship that it was different. It wasn't about something material. I wrote letters for guys to their girlfriends that didn't write. You know what I mean? I did all these little things. And then when it came to getting time off people's sentences, and once people realized that, like, I had someone come over to me and shake my hand that was a high level Muslim with a weapons charge that had gotten into the facility. And I had done something for him, and he came over to me, and when he would walk down the hallway, everybody would get out of his way. And he called my name, and he came and he shook my hand, and he goes, "Guess what?" And I said, "What?" He goes, "You're right." I said, "What am I right about?" He said, "The pen is mightier than the sword. I just got a year off the back end of my sentence because of what you wrote." And like all that stuff, and giving people that, and giving people the ability to maybe get home sooner or find a way to spend time with their family. I speak anybody that I was inside with and they're still there, I work with them for free, and they know it. So anytime they have a question, but giving people your time means something to me right now. Don't hand me money. Let's find out how to do something together in a meaningful way. And it resonates with me more than anything, but I think people start to get it.
Yeah, I suppose it's, there's a certain or there's many different thoughts going through my mind, and I'm hearing loud and clear your approach to it. So, and I'd love to get you back on, and we will do that. But I suppose there's one last question, and this is the thing that's whirring through my mind at the moment. When I think back to, and maybe this is more an indictment of me than anything else. So we're definitely both the sum of our experiences. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But and let me try and explain and qualify the statement that I'm about to make. So when I worked in the city, so I was in London for a few years. I was in Japan. I was in Singapore for a period of time, and I think back to those times. And for me, the city, because I come from a very working class background, and my friends were all, more in blue collar jobs than they were in white collar jobs. And when I was working in the city, I always wanted to get home and socialize with my friends and my family and the people that I knew and that I grew up with. So for me, the city was always quite transient. I didn't really get to know a lot of people. I didn't really want to spend much time with them. It was great during the day while I was working, and they were a part of me achieving what I needed to achieve within that career choice that I'd made. But I always look back on it, and there's one or two standouts, right? But there are very few friends that I'm still in touch with from the city days, if you like. And then, I think about the prison, and, again, I'm going to be harsh on myself now. Was I using some of those people to get by and communicate with and make the time a little bit easier than it was? Because I wouldn't stay in touch with any of them. And as I said at the beginning, I don't know if that's an indictment on me but I was kind of like that in the city as well. And, maybe it's my personality, and, I appreciate and laud what you're doing completely in terms of helping people. But I've got a couple of random letters that have made their way to me in Ireland from somebody in Singapore who says that they knew me in prison, and is there any chance I can send them a few quid? And it's not going to happen. And I don't really want anything to do with that period, but, am I completely disassociating myself with it? At the time, and I'll be honest, some of those people helped me through the time, and, maybe they were the people that I learned from during that period as well. But you're still in touch with some of the people.
Oh yeah, I mean, but look, what I do is related to that, right? So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, because again, I developed this skill and this knowledge base. Like I said, there were, when everything came out in 2017 and I did what I did, I lost like 95% of my life.
Yeah.
People, I went from unbelievable fake quantity to unbelievably great quality, right?
Yeah.
And then I realized there's a different way to screen people in your life going forward.
Yeah.
But the people, once you're in prison, you can understand. I'm not saying in the first 3 months. Look, there are a lot of fakers in prison. Eventually, though, and my dad always used to say this to me, no matter where you go, you take yourself with you. Eventually, you come out. You could go move to another neighborhood and start acting different than you are. But over time, you will come out, right?
Yeah,
In prison,
100%.
bad guys came out. No matter how they acted in the first 3 months, you
Yeah.
got to understand who they were, because they couldn't be the emperor that wears no clothes and fake everybody forever, right? So at the end of the day, the people that I genuinely bonded with and that I realized were good people that had done the worst thing that they could have done in their lives to put themselves there, I first of all, there's a kinship there, and you get to know people. But knowing what I know and having the skills that I have, I reach out to those people, right? But it's different. If I wasn't doing it, I don't know what type of contact I would have, other than a few individuals. But I do look at the way that I bring people into my life in a totally different way, of which, before, like I said, love was a word everybody said. I'm an Italian guy, right? When I get up from a table with 10 buddies, there's more kissing than a rom-com, right? We're all hugging each other. We all say I love you. But you don't realize who's ride or die with you until bullets are flying and you need them.
Yeah, I think the comment that you made was that, there used to be a lot of quantity and now there's a lot of quality. I think that sums it up perfectly. You're going through a tough time, and the cream will rise to the top. The people that are always going to be there for you, and I completely hear that. I think you go on. No, go on. You say.
I was just saying I lost people that had nothing to do. Like the money in my case came from very, very wealthy people. It doesn't justify it, but it wasn't friends and family. It wasn't elderly. It wasn't people in my life that lived in my neighborhood. They still all just ran in the other direction. That is, to me, and they were all people that meted me with hugs and said, "Love you, Mark," and getting off the phone. And like I said, you don't know until you need people, whether what they're saying is just words or it is it is truly what they mean. And look, I always joke around. I would never suggest someone there'll never be a book saying, go break a law and find out who loves you. But at the end of the day, it was a huge, huge positive in my life to understand and learn and trim that fat. I just wouldn't quite do it the way I did it. But
Yeah.
it was very positive for me at the end, and it's changed the way I look at people and close people in my life going forward.
But it's probably not changed you, has it? It's more outlook and the way that you think about things. And, because I always look back at myself and I think, like that fairly irrational person that existed in my early 20s is still there. I have to keep him at bay some of the times, and there are times when I don't, and I do something stupid. But it's not in the same sort of area. It's more out of some sort of jovial outcome rather than anything
Right.
sinister. But yeah, I don't know if you change too much from a behavioural perspective, but I agree. From an outlook, and I often, what did prison teach me? And you can answer. We'll make this the final question, and you can answer it after me. I think the only thing that it taught me is there's things in life you can influence, and there's things that you can't. And when you're in prison, you can't influence a great deal. As you said, there's rules, and you have to adhere to them, and there's no point butting your head against them. So, very much now I focus only on the things that I can influence, and the things that I can't influence, I really don't worry about them. They're just going to be there. They're going to do what they do, and they're not going to bother me. They're just part of life, and I'm not going to worry about them. But go on, your message from prison, if you like, or what you learned.
The first thing I'd like to say is I think your message is important and powerful. And the reason being is the thing I tell my guys the most is, and you just said it, we're just saying it in different ways, is worry about what you can control.
Yeah.
And and that's exactly what you just said. So as you're saying it, I'm kind of smiling inside, like he totally gets it.
Yeah.
My thought process on that and my answer is, I spent a lot of time acting and doing some of the things that I did based on expectations that no one ever had of me.
Yeah.
I just thought that in order to do this and be successful and feed my family, that everybody wanted me to do everything I possibly could in order to make sure things work and are successful, even if it included bending the rules. And what I realized at the end of the day is that the expectations from the people who love you are very, very simple and very, very low. And sometimes they only need you. And there isn't a dollar amount attached to it. And there's just you and your presence. And I've realized that I try to be more with people than near people. I think if you're going to ask me how I've changed, I think when I was wheeling and dealing and running all over Manhattan and running a hedge fund, I spent time with my family, but I spent time, near my family.
Yeah.
But I wasn't necessarily present. I was always worrying about the next email, about the next thing going on. And I've learned that with the people you love, the idea is to be present and care about them and their day. Everything else, there is nothing immediate. There is no, I'm not a freelance obstetrician, right? My beeper's not going off. I don't need to go anywhere and run. I realize that everything also, you can wait a day, disseminate it, and it can be taken care of tomorrow in like 99.9% of the cases. The world doesn't run. Everybody thinks that with the internet and everything they have, you need to solve everything yesterday. You've got 30 seconds, go figure it out. I've realized the important things in life, it's better to go think about it. And I never used to. I always used to go only with my gut. But I realized that taking the time to kind of think about a situation, it also helps me. Like I said, I was very successful, but I was flawed.
Yeah.
And I think this situation has made me better in all the ways that weren't attached to try to bring in the next treasure chest.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I think like you, I'm far more patient now. There's not too much that worries me. I think you've taught me something today, Mark, as well. I need to be more present. So I appreciate you for that. But it's been a pleasure speaking to you today. Hopefully we'll get you back on again fairly soon. The important stuff, I suppose, apart from you and I, is to make sure that people subscribe, view, and share this podcast. And would like you all to follow and subscribe. And Mark is certainly going to be a very interesting speaker at events. I'm still doing that speaking circuit 26 years after I was released from prison. So I hope you have a long life in that particular aspect of it. But preparing people for prison, it's unique, but I think it's much needed because it's a terrifying time for an awful lot of people. So Mark Varacchi, thank you very much for joining us today.
Nick, thank you very much. I love your content, love what you're doing. So I appreciate you very, very much. Thank you for your time.
All right. Take care.